We are privileged to have with us Professor Stephen Sterling. Thank you, David. Stephen is Professor of Sustainability Education at Plymouth University and former Senior Advisor to the UK Higher Education Academy on Education for Sustainable Development, and has worked as a consultant in environmental and sustainability education in the academic and NGO fields nationally and internationally for around 3 decades. He has been widely recognised for many years as one of the leading voices in sustainability education, and has published numerous books in the field. His work at Plymouth involves leading the research team on sustainability education and developing strategies to support curriculum change across the institution. He's also chair of the university's sustainability executive, and I just would like to point out that David did mention this morning that Plymouth received 3 Green Gown Awards last night at the UK ceremony, so congratulations, Plymouth University. Welcome, Stephen, to the stage.
Thanks, Leanne, and thank you for inviting me to all the way back to Australia after 4 years. I was last here. So I'm kind of representing UK and to some extent EAUC, which is your sister body in UK, and of course Plymouth, which Leanne just mentioned. So I'm really pleased to be here, delighted. I mean, I know people say that as a cliche, but it's actually true in this instance. I met an Aussie guy in England before I came out, and I told him I was coming over here, and he said, which part are you going to? And I said, I'm going to Hobart in Tasmania. And he said, wait for the terrible Aussie accent, he said, that's beautiful, mate. Mind you, I never made it down there. That's quite funny. I mean, clearly the reputation of Tasmania goes ahead of itself, and he was right. He was well informed. I mean, what a beautiful place! What a beautiful place! Just flying in. I'm just sorry. I don't have time to explore more fully. Okay, so let's go. I'm not going to talk about my title. I hope the meaning of the title becomes clear as I go on. Your conference itself has a great title, Connections for Holistic Sustainability. So, I think sustainability has to be holistic. Yeah, that's the biggest issue, I think, which confronts us, how to ensure that it's not perceived or understood to be or practiced as a category, a subject, a specialism that sits alongside other areas with little relationship to them. So I really like the other part of the title of this conference too, like Bridging Divides, and I'll come back to that. But I'm going to start a long time ago. I'm getting on a bit, I'm actually getting quite old. It's quite worrying, really, when I look in the mirror. But here's where I came in, 1972. I just graduated. I went into a London bookshop and came out a few minutes later, maybe 20 minutes later, having a pretty good idea of what I was going to do with my life. And what helped tip the balance was the book on the left, Teaching for Survival, an American book. And I thought, what a title, what a hell of a title. And this was the first wave of environmentalism, if you like, or modern environmentalism around the early 70s, coinciding with The Limits to Growth, the book in the middle there, Limits to Growth study by Meadows and Randers, and the UN Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm. So all this stuff was going on, and a lot of it was being reflected in the media. Also I was going to say the Stockholm Conference was the first conference internationally to identify education as a means of addressing environmental issues. So let's fast forward 40 years. And Randers, who is one of the authors of the Limits to Growth report, is responsible for the book in the middle there, 2052. And he's looking at the prospect of the next 40 years. World Watch report on the left, Governing for Sustainability, that comes out each year. Al Gore's book is a study of global change in the future. And Gore writes, there is a clear consensus that the future now emerging will be extremely different from anything we've ever known in the past. And United Nations Environment Programme report similarly stated that we are moving into a world that differs in fundamental ways from the one we have been familiar with during most of human history. This transition has profound consequences. So this is the world our graduates are entering. So this, from my point of view, puts a particular responsibility onto higher education. So what's happened in the 40 years since 72, 40 years plus, in environmental and sustainability education? Well, an awful lot, and you know this as well as I do. But I'm reminded of a talk I listened to back in January. There was a consultation document from the Higher Education Funding Council for England about sustainable development in higher education. About 300 keeners in working in this area in higher education were in the audience. And we had a talk by somebody who's not in education, but actually was the head of the National Health Service Sustainable Development Unit. Very good talk. And he said, whatever you're doing, it's not enough. Whatever you're doing, it's not enough, which is sobering, really. Meantime, whole chunks of higher education policy and practice are not only not responding to the crises and opportunities of sustainability, but arguably making things more problematic. This is a quote by Professor Arjen Vols, who some of you will undoubtedly know as a leading Dutch academic on this area. To some, this will be a controversial statement, the one at the top. But he's not alone. We've got David Orr around this week and talking tonight, who's said much the same thing for some years. And look towards the bottom of the slide in blue, that's a quote from UNESCO. ESD promotes efforts to rethink educational programs and systems that currently support unsustainable societies. Well, you know, that's from UNESCO and it has some authority, but it's quite a shocking statement in some ways. It's topical because, as you may know, it's the end of the decade of education for sustainable development right now, and I'll be in Japan next week for the conference, the World Conference on ESD, which is marking the end of the decade and looking forward to what remains to be done, as well as celebrating what's been achieved. As part of the preparation to that conference, I was asked to write a paper. And without going into detail, I identified in that paper what I call a deficit problem. So despite genuine advances in that 40-year period, all kinds of new initiatives, networks, partnerships, there's still a long way to go before education really fully embraces these issues. If we're talking about bridging the gap, then this is the biggie, if you like. So what's going on? How can we resolve the paradox that education is part of the solution, but also to some extent perpetuating the problem? It's both at once. What kind of education is appropriate for the kinds of conditions we find ourselves experiencing? How can this best be brought about? These are the kind of questions I've been grappling with for years, if you like, or trying to. So I came up some time ago with this idea of response, not just responsibility, but responsibility. So the ability to respond to these issues in a full way. So, but I want to start with a cartoon. So, as you can read that, our way of life is being threatened by a dark force. We must defend our way of life. What is this dark force which threatens our way of life? It's our way of life. So, you know, it's a great cartoon, and it captures the bind we're in, if you like, that unsustainable lifestyles are under threat from unsustainable lifestyles. So how do we escape that loop? Let me show you quite a powerful quote, which I use quite a bit because I think it gets to the nub of the issue. This is by a futures center in the US, an author called Raskin. The shape of the global future rests with the reflexivity of human consciousness, the capacity to think critically about why we think what we do, and then to think and act differently. So what he's looking for here is a deep learning, across society, if you like, recognizing patterns of thought and belief which are no longer appropriate to the conditions we face. And I would say move to a more integrative, more holistic, more connective, more ecological, if you like, it doesn't really matter what word you use, way of seeing and doing. Because if we remain stuck in old patterns, and this includes educational policy and practice, we cannot be responsible. Okay. Now, now a bit of participation. So I want you to imagine, because I haven't got it, another cartoon, but you can imagine it. And you can shut your eyes for this one. And for those of you who never do what you're told, I've got a nice picture. Okay, so imagine God with his big long white beard looking down on the earth, and he's worried. He's looking down, he's seeing wars breaking out and terrorism and pestilence and Ebola and whatnot, and species dying and climate change. And he's going, oh my goodness, what shall I do? And now it happens to be the devil there with him, and he's trying to be helpful for once. Maybe it's because he thinks he's winning. So he says to God, have you tried switching it off and on again? Now it's interesting that we're seeing similar calls regarding higher education. This is the World Conference I mentioned in Japan next week. And there's an end-of-decade report which will be launched next week. And it talks about the need for a global rebooting of higher education towards sustainable development. And it says that's going to need more than scaling up of good practice. To transform curricula and pedagogy requires deeper innovation in staff development and across institutions. So we have this rhetoric of rebooting and transformation, which is all fine. But now look at this quote from Anthony Cortese in the States, who has done much to advance this work in America. So you can read that for yourselves, but I've italicized the key line here. Why is HE so averse to risk and difficult to change? Because the change is sought as a deep cultural shift. So that reflects back on the Raskin quote that we need a change of culture and a change of consciousness, if you like. And without getting too philosophical, our sort of Western intellectual legacy of positivism and reductionism and objectivism and dualism, all these kind of things which are part of our way of thinking, are deeply ingrained in the way we think and in the way we do things, including education. However, and encouragingly, there is a renewal of urgency and initiatives around sustainability in HE, partly to coincide with the UNESCO conference. So just last week, for example, I came across this new guide to sustainability in higher education issued by something I hadn't heard of before, the International Alliance of Research Universities, which is an elite grouping of 10 universities internationally, including your very own ANU. And it's good. No, it's a good guide. And it reminds me of UNESCO documentation around EFS, ESD, which is also good and a lot better than it used to be. But there's something missing in the UNESCO documentation, something missing in this guide, as far as I'm concerned. And that is, there's very little critique of current paradigms, purposes, practices, in other words, the prevailing culture. So, why would a guide like this be needed if everything was okay? So some time ago, I came up with this framework, which I think is helpful in this respect. And the idea is that deeper levels give rise to the more immediate levels higher up. But the deeper levels of the educational culture are not necessarily looked at very often. So, educational discourse is often about the top three, policy, provision, and practice, not really about purposes of education. So what worries me is that EFS could be seen as a very desirable, perhaps new construction in higher education. So this is a metaphor, if you like, of an eco-house sitting on old foundations, which not themselves examined to see if they're fit for new purposes under new environments. So some of them will be, but some of them won't be. Here's another new book which I think does recognize that sustainability cannot be just some kind of overlay or bolt-on, if you like. So looking for new sets of relationships with our students, with each other, what we learn, and with ourselves. So I think this kind of thinking is getting us somewhere. And I think it is encouraging that the debate in literature is reflecting a more holistic view than was the case some years ago. And this includes the thrust of UNESCO's next plan. So when the decade finishes now, we will be launching next week a thing called GAP, which is quite aptly named, if you like, GAP, Global Action Plan, which, as you see there, seeks to generate and scale up action in all levels and areas of education. And this plan makes quite a thing about whole institutional approaches. But again, not much critique of, maybe no critique of existing patterns and practices. But all the global reports emphasize that time is short. We don't have another 40 years. Now, to take this argument forward, I want to give you a slightly daunting framework, which is by Ken Wilber, the American holistic philosopher you may have heard of. But it's simpler than it looks, possibly. There's a lot to this, and I might not be doing full justice to it, but Wilber's model maps 4 dimensions of reality and 4 corresponding perspectives. So he makes a distinction between our interior subjective world on the left and our external objective physical world on the right, but also between our individual realities and our collective experience. So you might think, well, why is he bothering us with all this stuff? Well, it's because sustainability in EFS often concentrates on the right-hand side, on the exterior world, on behavior change and changing tangible systems such as structures, processes, policies and rewards. Well, that's clearly valid. I'm not saying it isn't. But if we're interested in transforming HE, and a lot of the documentation for the conference next week talks about transforming HE. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean, transforming? We need to give more attention to the inner world, if you like, at both individual and collective level. So that's quite a challenge. To become more response-able, if you like, is a big learning challenge. I think this slide illustrates some of that challenge, because if you think about universities responding to this agenda, we're often talking about the left-hand side, about developing new programs, new courses, new curricula, which is clearly good. But if you look at the best practice internationally, nearly always the institution itself has gone through a learning process. So you know, everybody from the cleaners to the vice chancellor and everybody in between has gone through some kind of learning process, which then enhances our ability to provide exciting and fresh curricula on the left-hand side. So these two areas, these two arenas of learning, if you like, are both important. So, for example, when I get back to the UK, I've got a key meeting with my senior management at the university, and I'm trying, you know, it sounds slightly, I don't know, slightly arrogant maybe, but I'm trying to educate senior managers more about the importance and the potential of this area, even though Plymouth is doing pretty well. You know, that needs to be part of the strategic approach. So, how do universities respond to this? Well, as you all know, sitting here, it takes time. You know, we've been working at it for nearly 10 years at Plymouth, and some universities will be off the scale on the left-hand side, but you can imagine it's a spectrum of change from the left to right, from a fairly simple approach, or simple interpretation on the left-hand column, if you like, towards a more transformative and deeper interpretation on the right, which is more difficult, more ambitious, more demanding, but actually, in my view, where we need to go as a sector. So a bit about Plymouth. That's enough theory, if you like. we've had some success. Without reading the ins and outs of this slide, this is just some indicative of some of the things we've now got in place. We have a student campaign league called the Green League, which has been enormously successful in ratcheting up pressure on senior managements up and down the country to respond more actively to this agenda. And Plymouth has averaged out in the top few ever since it's been running since 2007. So let me tell you in my closing minutes or so, how have you got to this point over 10 years? Well, it's a long story, so I'll just concentrate on one or two of the key aspects. We have a team called the Centre for Sustainable Futures, CSF, which I've been with all the whole time, and now I run. In a way, it's been a means by which we've taken a strategic approach within the university, working at all levels over that period, which has been quite effective. We started in 2005. We started off with a holistic model of university operations, and I think some kind of holistic framework is needed. And this is the model we came up with all those years ago, what we call the 4C model, looking at the relationships between curriculum, community and campus, and encircling that culture, which is more intangible, but actually quite important to try to tackle. We developed a clear idea of what a shift might entail. So if you take the area of curriculum, this is indicative of the kind of shift we were trying to effect, to try to make come into reality. And we linked this with what was happening in the sector anyway. So, it's probably the same here in Australia. Increased interest in student engagement, in flexible learning, in curriculum renewal. So you can take advantage of opportunities arising as the debate in higher education changes. We worked at the whole institutional level, influencing senior management and having a vision of whole institutional change, which to some extent is now reflected in the university's corporate plan. So trying to move towards a more integrative model on the right, away from the silos. I mean, we've still got silos, which university doesn't. But a lot of our work was linking things up horizontally, because to counteract the fragmentation, if you like. So over time, we managed to get the sustainability identified as one of the university's 4 key ambitions in its corporate strategy. And this is a line from the strategy which gives myself and my colleagues mandate to really work with schools and faculties to make sure this means something in practice. So our 2020 strategy, as it's called, is in terms of sustainability, is now reflected in teaching and learning strategy, the campus strategy, research and innovation strategy, and of course the sustainability strategy. So all these things are consistent as far as possible. In terms of how we made this thing work, we have for some years been operating an integrative structure which brings together 3 areas: operations and estates, research and teaching and learning, which meets regularly, basically. And also we have a wider sustainability executive grouping across the university, which I have the privilege of chairing. It's not a perfect process by any means, but it allows us to take advantage of synergies and bring people together who otherwise wouldn't be brought together, for example, around a carbon management work. So that structure is reflected in our new sustainability strategy, and we're now working on a detailed action plan. So this, again, the sustainability strategy means something. It's very easy to get quite high-level, good-sounding lines, but what do they mean in practice? And you need to tease that out with as many stakeholders as you can. My own team works in 9 project areas, as shown here, and across 3 themes. So they are curriculum change, pedagogic research, and whole institutional change. So we're working in those areas the whole time with staff and students. Around 50% of our courses have a sustainability element now, right up to specialist level, and we're trying to increase that further. We engage in national and international schemes which give us, independent assessment and validation, which is very important in terms of influencing senior management. So we engage with the International Green Metric coming out of Indonesia, I think it is, the UK People and Planet Green League, and the Life Sustainability Index, which looks like that. I know that all ACTS members can now access this scheme for free. It was just launched by EAUC, relaunched, I should say, a simpler version about 3 weeks ago, something like that. So I would recommend engaging with the LIFE framework, because it is a whole institutional framework, and it, in some way it does some of the thinking for you, and you just work that around as you can. And I think we were one of the first universities to go through the process in the UK, and what was useful is not just doing the tick box exercise box, but the process of gathering evidence. So you're involving as many people as possible in that process, and that itself generates interest in change. I think part of the recipe is having some understanding of direction, and this billboard was a nice surprise one day. I came around the corner of the campus, and this shocking great billboard, the university is building a sustainable future. I never did quite find out who put it there, but it was good, and so I immediately got my camera and took a picture, because it's a public statement, and it's a great slogan. What does it mean? What does it imply? How do we know we're doing it? And that billboard is gone. It was hiding a new construction, but we've got a similar billboard right on the edge of the perimeter of the university, making a statement to Plymouth, and it's there permanently. So that's great. It's something we can live up to. What else have we done? We've published quite a bit. This is a booklet I put together for the Higher Education Academy when David Sadler was still a senior executive there. Which is really a booklet for those colleagues who are not, well, they say something like, I know this is important, but I don't know how to get started. What does it mean for me? It's that kind of booklet. And you can get this online quite easily for free from the Higher Education Academy. We've also published a few books, which again, record work, if you like, one on curriculum, one on education development and sustainability, and the last one called The Sustainable University, which documents the work of 10 UK universities on this learning journey, if you like. But it also lays down a challenge to the sector as a whole to raise its game further in the light of the big issues which we are aware of. This next publication is not out yet. It's new. It's come out of Plymouth, but we've developed it with EAUC, your sister organisation in the UK. And as you can see, it's called Building Resilience into the Future of Your University. And it's who it's for is for governors up and down the land. To try and get, the governors are really important people, and I guess you've got the equivalent here, and to try and get, and again, it's an educative function, if you like, try to get them to understand what this is all about, and to approve policy change is important. So, as I said, it's not out yet, but it's 99% done, and it will be available. So that's a bit about Plymouth. What I'm not claiming is that we have all the answers. It's an ongoing learning process, even after 10 years. What we do is keep an ongoing SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So we know all the time what's coming up, what needs to be done to monitor our progress as well as our areas which need attention. Okay, but another 5 minutes and I'll stop. These are some of the key things we're working on all the time, because they all do need working on all the time. So it's always busy, there's always lots to do, as I'm sure you all know because you're all in the thick of it. But it's kind of exciting too, to see changes over time and the engagement of staff and students. Talking of students, one of the drivers in the UK, which is really quite important, is the student voice. So we have a National Union of Students in UK, NUS, which is very, very engaged in this agenda and does all kinds of interesting stuff up and down the country. They've done 3 years of research in cooperation with the Higher Education Academy, and interestingly, over 3 years of research with a sample of about 6,000 students, consistently 60% of students want to learn about sustainability regardless of what they're studying. And 80% want their institutions to embed sustainability across their operations. So clearly this is a major piece of evidence that we can use with managements to take work further. The Higher Education Academy has run a terrific program called Green Academy for 2 years, working with small teams. These are some of the universities which have been on this program to take this agenda further. And it's really led, in some cases, to universities which were hardly doing anything to now becoming sector leaders, working with small teams over a period of a year and exchanging experience. And sadly, that program's come to an end because the academy hasn't got the budget. But it's a great model, and I could tell you more about that if you want to know, because it really has worked. Another development is looking at the relationship between EFS and quality assurance, and that's another fertile area, if you like. And our own quality assurance agency has put out guidelines in June this year, which are relevant to all disciplines, not just the obvious ones, if you like. So this kind of thing provides legitimation and guidance for far more staff and students to get involved. Okay, so in coming to the end, what's interesting is how the debate in higher education is in flux anyway, and it's not just people like me making these sorts of noises. So this is a very interesting quote from a European Commission document called The Modernisation of Higher Education, Improving the Quality of Teaching and Learning in Europe, from last year, and I'll give you a second to read that. So that's interesting to see that coming from a key body like the European Commission. So how do we get this kind of reoriented, realigned education, which again will be called for at the big UNESCO conference, which will have government ministers and so on at it next week in Japan. This model could be possibly helpful. If you take any document from at any level, from a university mission statement to a policy to a strategy to a faculty plan to program aims to lecture notes, you can have a sort of a checklist or a think list. How far does it embrace these wider contextual issues? How far does it connect up with real issues? Is it sensitive to the culture in which it's located? Does it weigh assumptions critically? Is there a degree of commitment there with ensuring an ethical ethos of care? And what is the contribution this policy is going to make in the long term? Okay, finishing now. I haven't said a lot about critical commitment, which is in my title. This is a line from my book. And why have I included a cartoon showing somebody in difficulties in a pond? It's because we're actually immersed in the world. We are deeply implicated in the world we see. There's no neutral territory in the sense that virtually everything we do has connections and consequences. And what surprises me, being involved in this in academia for years, is an awful lot of policy and practice and events and conferences proceed as if there's a kind of a stable reality as a given, and they make take no heed of these larger issues, if you like, which is surprising. It's as if you take that cartoon, we're on the bank talking to each other, whereas the reality is that we're actually in the pond and we need to choose to sink or swim. So I think we need to step out of our HE world sometimes and expand our vision. So this idea of a sustainable university, this is a quote from Haile Selassie from South Africa, which I just like this quote, and it's in the book which I produced last year. So a sustainable university is one which is wholly response-able, if you like, to these opportunities and challenges. So last slide brings me back to the conference theme, bridging the divide. The need to bridge the divide between where HE policy is and where it needs to be, between what's pragmatic and possible and what we need to do in terms of a bold future-facing vision. Between current agendas and the sustainability agenda, so that they are seen as synergetic rather than separate, and between the emphasis on external and material change and inner transformative change, if you like. So that's all. Oh, that's the conference we're doing, sorry. And there's a few references on the slides, and there's a few extra references there, and hopefully these slides will be made available for those of you who want them. A lot of stuff there, but I only got, come all this way. I wanted to give you a good bit of money's worth, if you like. And I hope at least some of that has been both useful and helpful. Thank you.